I am telling you, sir, you are in the wrong seat. This is my seat. Look at my boarding pass.
What do you mean you can't find my reservation? I demand to speak to your supervisor.
Ma'am, please, there's no need to shout. Let me see what I can do.
How dare you speak to me like that? You will regret this.
What would you do if you paid for your seat, checked in properly, and sat down quietly, only to be told you didn't belong? What if, in that moment, the truth wasn't about boarding passes or upgrades, but about who the world assumed you were? This is the story of Malcolm Reed, a calm and steady black CEO who boarded Skyreach Flight 462 just like any other passenger. He wore no suit, carried no entourage, just a quiet presence and a valid first-class ticket. Yet within minutes, a stranger demanded his seat. Crew members hesitated, assumptions hardened, and a clash began that no one on board could have predicted. But here's the twist. Malcolm wasn't just any passenger. He owned the very airline whose staff had doubted his right to sit in 2A. What unfolded was not just a fight for a seat, but a battle for dignity, justice, and change that would ripple across an entire industry. How far can one man's quiet resolve reach, and what happens when truth collides with entitlement at 30,000 feet? Before we dive into this unforgettable story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss a moment of what comes next. The terminal still carried the hush of early morning when Malcolm Reed approached Gate 52 at JFK. He had always preferred morning flights. The world was quieter, less hurried, as though even the chaos of an international hub had not yet fully awakened. The faint aroma of coffee drifted from a nearby kiosk, blending with the echo of rolling suitcases across polished floors. He adjusted the strap of his worn leather carry-on and presented his boarding pass to the gate agent. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. First class, seat 2A. Enjoy your flight," the agent said with a practiced smile. Malcolm nodded, returning the smile, though his mind was elsewhere. He had traveled countless times, across continents and time zones, but every time he approached a first-class cabin, a small voice whispered from memory, "Will they look at me and see what I've built, or will they see only what they want to see?" He moved down the jet bridge, the cool air seeping through tiny gaps, and entered the aircraft. The cabin lighting was soft, golden, casting a calm glow over the plush leather seats. First class was half empty, still filling with passengers adjusting coats, stowing luggage, ordering water before takeoff. Seat 2A waited at the front row by the window. It was his favorite seat, not for the view, but for the quiet it offered. He placed his bag in the overhead bin, slid into the seat, and let his shoulders rest against the cushion. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to simply breathe. He thought of his daughter Maya back home, who had insisted he pack the granola bars she loved as a kid. He thought of his wife, Lena, who teased him for always carrying a notebook even in the age of smartphones. He thought of the company he had built from scratch, Skyreach Airline's largest shareholder and the founder of Reed Technologies, the firm that had quietly reshaped aviation software. But none of that mattered here. Here, he was just another passenger in 2A. Malcolm pulled out his notebook, the cover worn from years of scribbling during late-night flights. He began to jot thoughts for an upcoming board meeting. Safety metrics, cost reductions, community engagement. The scratch of the pen steadied him. Then came the voice of doubt, the echo of history. He remembered the time, 15 years ago, when a flight attendant had called security on him for sitting in business class with his upgraded ticket. The humiliation had seared itself into his mind, the sideways glances, the murmurs of maybe he snuck in. That day, he had quietly relocated to economy, swallowing his anger. Never again. He whispered under his breath now. A gentle announcement hummed overhead. Boarding is complete for Flight 462 to Los Angeles. Please ensure seatbelts are fastened. Malcolm closed his notebook, placed it carefully in the seat pocket, and exhaled. He looked out the window, watching as dawn began to paint the horizon with pale streaks of orange. This was supposed to be a simple flight. 4.5 hours in the sky. Time to catch up on reading. Maybe a nap before landing. Yet, beneath that calm surface, there was an unease he couldn't shake. He had felt it from the moment he left the lounge, the way 2 businessmen in suits had given him a double take when he walked toward first class, the way one of them whispered, surprising, "Huh," as though his presence disrupted some unspoken rule. Malcolm clenched his jaw, loosening it quickly before the tension traveled down his body. Don't assume. Don't project, he told himself. Maybe this will be just another flight. Maybe today will be different. The aisle filled with the rustle of coats and bags as the last passengers boarded. A woman in a tailored cream suit brushed past, her perfume sharp, her posture commanding. She paused when she reached row 2. Her eyes flicked from Malcolm to the seat number. Malcolm lifted his gaze, polite but reserved. Her brows pinched together. "Excuse me, I believe you're in my seat." He blinked once, then calmly pulled the boarding pass from his pocket. 2A, he said evenly, showing the print. The woman's lips curved, but not into a smile, more like a smirk. "That's impossible. This seat is mine. Check again." Malcolm felt the familiar sting, that moment when dignity brushed up against disbelief. He held her gaze. "This is 2A. My ticket says 2A. A beat of silence passed. The cabin around them continued in muted rhythm, overhead bins clicking shut. Safety briefings being prepared. Yet, for Malcolm, time slowed. He saw again the pool of memories. The time strangers had insisted he didn't belong. The sting of being measured not by his credentials, but by assumptions. His hand rested on the armrest, steady but tense. Do I fight this right away? Do I let it play out? His mind wrestled. He thought of Maya, who once asked, "Daddy, why do people sometimes look at us differently?" He had promised her that dignity was not negotiable. The woman adjusted her suit jacket, tilting her chin upward. "You people always make things complicated," she muttered, low enough for him to hear. The words cut deeper than she knew. Malcolm's breath stilled in his chest. That phrase, "you people," wasn't just careless. It was a blade, polished by centuries of dismissal. Inside, his thoughts roared. Do I let her push me out? Do I swallow it, like so many times before? Or do I stand here, in this seat, as proof that I belong? A shadow fell across them as a flight attendant approached, her name tag glinting. "Olivia Chen, is everything all right here?" she asked, voice calm, but with an undertone of weariness. She glanced at Malcolm, then at the woman, and Malcolm caught it, that flicker of assumption, the calculation of who was more likely to be right. Malcolm inhaled slowly, holding his ground. The battle had begun, though the real war was still ahead. The air in the cabin felt suddenly thinner, as though the oxygen had been drawn out when Claire Whitmore refused to budge. Her posture was immaculate, shoulders squared, chin lifted, one manicured hand resting on the armrest as though she were a queen protecting her throne. The seatbelt buckle dangled at her side, untouched, because she had settled in long before she was supposed to, certain that the seat was hers. Malcolm Reed sat still, boarding pass in hand, his calm gaze fixed on her. The words had been simple, but they carried a weight he knew all too well. You people, 2 words that could shrink a lifetime of achievement into a stereotype. He inhaled slowly, his chest rising and falling like the tide. "Ma'am," he said evenly, "this ticket clearly shows 2A. I am in my assigned seat." Claire's eyes narrowed. "That's very unlikely. I fly Aurora Airlines all the time. They don't make mistakes like this." Malcolm tilted his head, still refusing to raise his voice. "And yet, here we are." The woman gave a short laugh, the kind designed not to express humor, but superiority. "Why don't you let me handle this with the crew? I'm sure they'll sort it out quickly." Her tone carried the presumption that authority would naturally lean her way, that the system would validate her comfort over his truth. Malcolm felt the weight of that history pressing against him. He thought of his father, who once told him, "Son, there will be days when they'll try to move you, not because you're wrong, but because they don't see you. Don't let them erase you." As Olivia Chen returned to the row, clipboard in hand, Malcolm braced himself. She gave Claire an apologetic smile first, before turning to Malcolm. "Sir." "Could I see your boarding pass again?" Malcolm handed it over without hesitation. "2A. Confirmed." Olivia scanned it, then looked at Claire. "And your ticket." Ma'am Claire slid her phone screen toward Olivia with the confidence of someone who had never been doubted. "See seat 2A." Olivia frowned, her eyes darting between the 2 tickets. "That's strange," she murmured. "It looks like the system issued a duplicate." Claire crossed her arms triumphantly, as though that explained everything. "Obviously, it belongs to me. I booked this flight weeks ago." The attendant's gaze shifted back to Malcolm. For a heartbeat, her eyes carried the silent plea. Wouldn't it be easier to move? Just this once. Malcolm recognized that look. He had seen it in boardrooms, in restaurants, in elevators where security guards had asked him twice for ID while ignoring everyone else. The look that suggested the smoothest path was to step aside. His fingers curled around the armrest. Inside, his mind churned. Do I yield to convenience, or do I hold the line for dignity? "I'm not moving," he said softly, but with steel beneath. Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the calm finality in his tone. Claire scoffed. "Really? You're going to make this difficult?" Malcolm leaned back into the seat, his expression unchanging. "I am sitting where my ticket says. I'm not making this difficult. The system did." The tension stretched across the cabin. A man in row 3 lowered his newspaper to watch. A couple whispered across the aisle. The atmosphere was no longer casual. It had become electric. Claire shifted in her seat, clearly unused to resistance. "You don't understand," she said. "I have status with this airline. I always get 2A. This is probably just a mix-up they'll fix in a moment." Malcolm allowed himself a small smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. Status doesn't override a boarding pass. Claire's jaw clenched. "People like you," she muttered, her voice just above a whisper, "always trying to play victim." The words sank into him like stones in water. He had heard them too many times, in too many forms. He thought of the night a venture capitalist once told him he was impressive for someone from his background. He thought of the meeting where a client had mistaken him for the driver instead of the CEO. Each moment layered upon the other, building a tower of indignities. Now, in seat 2A, the tower loomed high. Olivia shifted awkwardly. "I'll need to speak with the captain," she said, her voice betraying her uncertainty. She hurried away, leaving the 2 locked in silence. Malcolm kept his gaze forward, refusing to give Claire the satisfaction of eye contact. Yet inside, his thoughts raged. If I stand my ground, I risk becoming the villain in their eyes. If I move, I become the victim in my own. His heartbeat thudded steadily, each beat echoing the mantra he had lived by: dignity over convenience. Claire, meanwhile, pulled out her phone, tapping furiously. I'll let customer service know about this. They'll fix it immediately. She shot him a glance filled with disdain. I've been flying this airline for 20 years. They know me. Malcolm considered answering, but chose silence. Sometimes silence carried more power than any retort. The minutes dragged. Passengers settled. Flight attendants prepared safety demonstrations. But Row 2 remained a battlefield suspended in uneasy stillness. Finally, Olivia returned, this time with a taller man in uniform, Captain James Foster. His cap tucked under one arm, his eyes assessing the situation with a weariness that suggested he had seen many disputes but preferred none of them. What's the issue here? He asked. Olivia explained quickly, holding both tickets in her hands. It seems the system issued the same seat to both passengers. Tuo? The captain sighed, glancing first at Claire, then at Malcolm. His gaze lingered a fraction longer on Malcolm, as though weighing convenience against confrontation. Sir, he said, addressing Malcolm, would you mind relocating to another seat in first class, just to make sure we can depart on time? It'll be more comfortable for everyone if we avoid a scene. The words struck Malcolm like cold rain. He had expected it, almost predicted it, yet the sting was sharp. He felt the pull of memory again, the countless times authority had chosen the easier path at his expense. His voice remained calm, but his eyes sharpened. Captain, with respect, my ticket says 2A. I intend to sit here. The captain exhaled slowly, as if patience itself were draining from him. I understand, but sometimes it's better to be flexible. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Flexible. Always me. Always us. The ones expected to bend so others can remain straight. He met the captain's gaze, unblinking. Sometimes, Captain, flexibility means erasing someone's rights. I will not move. The cabin hushed. Even the shuffling of papers and clicking of seatbelts seemed to pause. Claire looked at the captain expectantly, certain he would side with her. Olivia shifted from foot to foot, caught in the uncomfortable middle. Malcolm's heart pounded, but outwardly he was a statue, composed and resolute. Hold your ground, he told himself, not just for you, but for every time silence was forced upon you. Claire broke the silence with a huff. This is ridiculous. Are we all supposed to suffer a delay because he refuses to cooperate? Malcolm finally turned to her, his voice even. We are delayed because the system failed, not because I chose to exist. The words landed heavily, reverberating through the cabin. A woman across the aisle raised her phone discreetly. A man in the back leaned forward, intrigued. Tension had shifted. Malcolm's quiet defiance had begun to reshape the balance of the room. The captain muttered something about speaking with ground control and stepped away. Olivia followed, leaving Claire simmering in her seat, glaring daggers at Malcolm. He leaned back, closed his eyes for a brief moment, and inhaled inside. The battle still raged, fear of escalation, anger at injustice, determination to remain unmoved. He pictured Maya's face, her small hands holding his years ago, when she asked why people stared at them in restaurants. He pictured his wife, reminding him that change never came from silence. Malcolm opened his eyes again, steel shining through. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing he would not surrender. 2A. The hum of the engines vibrated faintly beneath the cabin floor as the standoff in row 2 stretched on. Passengers whispered. Their curiosity piqued, but their voices low, as though they were watching a play unfold on stage. Malcolm Reed remained steady in his seat, his boarding pass resting in his palm like a silent shield. Claire Whitmore fidgeted beside him, her annoyance radiating in waves, and her sharp sighs filled the air like daggers meant to pierce his composure. When Olivia Chen returned, her expression carried the kind of strained professionalism that came from years of diffusing quarrels between passengers. She crouched slightly, her smile tight, her tone designed to soothe. "Mr. Reed, I do understand your frustration, but perhaps, just this once, you could allow us to reseat you. It would be much easier for everyone." Malcolm studied her face. She didn't mean harm. He could tell, but the words echoed with an all-too-familiar pattern. For everyone. That phrase was always heavy with implication. It meant for everyone else's comfort. His dignity should be the sacrifice. He thought of the board meetings where he had been mistaken for an assistant instead of the chair. He thought of the conferences where people shook hands with his white colleagues first. Even though he was the keynote speaker, always, there was the suggestion that it would be smoother, easier, if he simply stepped aside. "I'm in the seat I paid for," he replied, calm but firm. His voice carried no heat, no aggression, only conviction. "It is not my responsibility to fix a system error by erasing myself." Olivia's lips parted, as if she wanted to argue, then pressed closed again. She glanced at Claire, whose smirk had returned, smug and expectant. Claire leaned forward slightly. "See? Even the crew agrees this is a mistake. Why don't you stop being so difficult?" Malcolm turned his gaze toward the window for a brief second, the dawn light painting the horizon in streaks of pale gold. His reflection stared back at him, eyes steady but heavy with the weight of years. He thought of his daughter, Maya, who once asked him if people like them would always have to fight for a seat at the table. He remembered the ache in his chest when he told her he hoped not, but couldn't promise. He wondered if this very moment would someday be a story he told her, a reminder that silence had never brought change. "I am not being difficult," he said finally, his tone even sharper in its calmness. "I am sitting in my assigned seat." Olivia's eyes flickered again with that unspoken plea. She was balancing her duty with her instinct, and right now duty leaned toward convenience. "Mr. Reed," she said softly, "if you don't move, this will delay departure. People will be upset. You don't want that." The logic was clear, but the implications stabbed deep. He was being told that the comfort of strangers mattered more than his right to exist without being displaced. He felt a tremor of anger coil in his chest, threatening to rise. But instead of unleashing it, he pressed it down into something sharper, something more precise. Anger uncontrolled was fire. Anger contained was steel. "I don't want delay either," he said. "But delay is not caused by me. It is caused by error, and by refusal to acknowledge that error fairly." A few passengers nodded subtly. A man in row 3 shifted in his seat, murmuring something to his wife. The woman across the aisle leaned forward, eyes fixed on the exchange. The quiet ripple of awareness was spreading. The stage lights of attention were turning brighter. Claire rolled her eyes dramatically, raising her voice just enough for nearby passengers to hear. "This is exactly what I mean. Always looking for a fight. Always trying to make a scene. Some of us actually earned our place here." The words hung in the air like smoke, acrid and suffocating. Malcolm's hands tightened briefly on the armrest. He thought of all the nights he had stayed awake building Reed technologies from scratch, coding in the dim light of a cramped apartment while the world outside dismissed him. He thought of the deals he had negotiated, the markets he had conquered, the billions his innovations had generated. And yet, to her, to people like her, his place was always in question, his belonging always conditional. His voice remained measured, but his eyes burned. I earned my place here, too. Olivia shifted uncomfortably, sensing the rising tension. She gave Claire a quick, quiet warning look, but did not rebuke her. Instead, she straightened and said, "I'll consult the captain again. Please stay calm." She walked briskly down the aisle, her shoes clicking softly against the carpet, leaving behind the simmering heat of injustice. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, breathing deeply, his mind a storm. If I let them move me, I betray every lesson I ever taught my daughter about standing firm. If I dig in, I risk becoming their problem passenger, the one they label as difficult. Which path honors dignity more? Which path protects it? He remembered a moment years ago, waiting for a promotion that never came. His supervisor at the time, a man who had praised his work in private, told him in the end, "We just don't think you'd be the right face of leadership." That sentence had carved itself into him, sharp and unforgettable. And now, here he was, once again told in subtler ways that his face, his presence, was not the right fit for seat 2A. The murmur of voices grew louder as passengers speculated. A young woman 2 rows back whispered into her phone, "There's something happening up front." Another man snapped a photo. His camera flash quickly stifled by his wife's elbow. The atmosphere had shifted from casual anticipation to uneasy curiosity. Claire tilted her head toward Malcolm, her voice low but dripping with disdain. "You'll lose. You know. They'll side with me. They always do." Malcolm turned his head slowly, meeting her eyes. His stare was steady, unflinching. Not this time. The conviction in his words startled even him. He felt the fire within solidify into resolve. He had crossed the line of hesitation. There was no retreat now. His father's voice echoed in his mind, the wisdom passed down through years of struggle. There will be moments when silence is betrayal, when your dignity is the only weapon you have, and you must wield it without fear. He sat taller in his seat, the light from the window framing him in a quiet glow. Whatever storm was brewing, he would not yield. Not here, not today. The aisle shifted again as Olivia reappeared, this time her expression tighter, her movements brisker. Behind her, Captain James Foster followed, his brow furrowed, his mouth set in a thin line. The situation had escalated beyond routine. The eyes of the cabin followed their every step, anticipation heavy in the air. Malcolm prepared himself. He knew what was coming. He knew the easy answer the captain would propose, the compromise that would once again demand his dignity as the price for peace. But this time, he was ready. The aisle was silent as Captain James Foster stopped beside row 2. His uniform was immaculate, the gold stripes on his sleeves glinting under the cabin lights. He carried himself with the quiet authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. He looked first at Olivia Chen, who held out the 2 boarding passes like evidence in a trial, then at Claire Whitmore, whose posture radiated smug certainty, and finally at Malcolm Reed, who sat with calm but unwavering resolve. "What's the problem here?" the captain asked, though his tone already suggested annoyance more than curiosity. Olivia explained quickly. Her words rushed, as though eager to offload the tension from her shoulders. There seems to have been a duplicate seat assignment for 2A. Both passengers claim it. Foster sighed and rubbed the bridge of his nose. All right. Easy solution. Mr. Reed, we'll reseat you in another part of first class. You'll still have all the same amenities. Let's just avoid a scene. Malcolm felt the weight of every eye on him. He sat straighter, his voice even but firm. Captain, my boarding pass clearly states 2A. I am already in my assigned seat. I have no intention of moving. Claire let out a sharp laugh. Oh, come on. This is ridiculous. He's just making a fuss for no reason. Everyone here knows this seat is mine. The captain turned toward her, nodding sympathetically, then looked back at Malcolm. Sir, I'm asking you to cooperate so we can depart on time. Malcolm's jaw tightened. His voice, though calm, carried a steel edge. With respect, Captain, cooperation does not mean surrendering my rights. I am not the cause of this error, nor am I the cause of the delay. A murmur rippled through the cabin. Passengers leaned closer, straining to hear. A few phones were lifted discreetly, their red recording lights glowing like tiny eyes. The tension that had simmered for minutes now began to boil, and the air seemed charged with electricity. Claire leaned forward, her voice dripping with disdain. This is what you people always do, turning something small into a spectacle, playing the victim when you should just accept reality. The words cut the air like a blade. You people, a phrase sharpened by centuries, wielded casually as if it carried no weight, yet it landed with devastating precision. A gasp broke from somewhere behind them. A woman across the aisle froze, her phone trembling in her hand as she captured the moment. Malcolm inhaled slowly, his chest rising with measured restraint. Inside, his thoughts raged. He remembered the first time he heard that phrase as a boy, when a teacher dismissed his complaint about unfair treatment. He remembered the corporate dinners where colleagues whispered it after he left the table. He remembered each time it had been used to draw a line, to remind him that no matter how high he climbed, some people would always try to drag him back down, but he refused to let his voice tremble. What exactly do you mean by you people? He asked, his tone controlled, but cutting. Claire smirked, though her eyes flickered with the faintest trace of unease now that the spotlight was on her. Don't twist my words. Everyone knows what I meant. The cabin was no longer just a cabin. It was a stage, a courtroom, a battlefield of perception. Passengers whispered, their shock and disapproval palpable. A young woman in the third row Naomi Park, a college student traveling home, raised her phone higher, her live stream comments flashing rapidly across the screen. Thousands of strangers, and soon millions, were witnessing the moment in real time. Malcolm's mind raced. Part of him wanted to unleash the fury that had built over years, to expose the ugliness of her prejudice for what it was. Another part urged restraint, reminding him that anger often became ammunition for those who wanted to dismiss him. He thought of Maya again, her wide eyes the day she asked why a classmate told her she didn't belong at the science fair. He had told her then that dignity was not negotiable, that respect must be demanded, not begged. He turned back to Claire, his voice low but carrying. What you said reveals more about you than it does about me. I will not be diminished by your prejudice. The statement settled over the cabin like a verdict. Claire scoffed loudly, trying to reclaim ground. This is absurd. Captain, are you really going to let him sit here and hold up an entire flight? He's being unreasonable. People like him always... She stopped, catching herself, but the damage was already done. The words hung heavy, undeniable, impossible to ignore. Captain Foster shifted uncomfortably. He was no longer dealing with a simple seating dispute. The eyes of the passengers, the glow of recording phones, the murmurs of disapproval, all of it pressed against him. Yet still, his instinct leaned toward convenience. "Mr. Reed, if you would just cooperate, we can all move forward." Malcolm's voice sharpened with quiet authority. "Captain, with due respect, you are asking the wrong person to cooperate. The burden is not mine." Olivia looked from one to the other, her expression tightening. She wanted the situation to dissolve, to return to the routine of beverage service and safety demonstrations. But even she could not ignore the weight of what had just been said. Her silence spoke volumes. In the back of the cabin, Rachel Alvarez, a journalist for the Washington Post, flipped open her notebook. She had been observing quietly, but now she recognized the gravity of the moment. Her pen moved swiftly, capturing words, details, the tension thick enough to choke on. The murmurs swelled as Naomi's livestream spread like wildfire. Comments scrolled by faster than her eyes could process. Unbelievable. This is discrimination. Stand your ground, sir. The world outside the cabin was awakening to the injustice playing out within. Malcolm sat taller, his hands resting calmly on his knees, though inside his heart thundered. He felt the pull of generations behind him, the weight of every injustice endured and every act of courage demanded. He could almost hear his father's voice again, firm and resolute, "Son, there will come a day when your silence will cost more than your words. On that day, speak. Even if your voice shakes." His voice did not shake. "Captain," he said, "I am not moving. Not for convenience. Not for prejudice. Not for anyone." The silence that followed was thick, broken only by the hum of the engines. Claire bristled, her face flushed with indignation. "You'll regret this," she hissed under her breath, though her confidence was cracking. The power of assumption that had carried her this far was beginning to falter under the weight of witness. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. He knew this was only the beginning. The storm had broken, but the gale was yet to come. He was ready. Captain James Foster lingered beside row 2, his eyes sweeping the cabin as though calculating not just the seating chart, but the weight of the silence pressing in from every direction. Authority was written into every crease of his uniform, every firm line of his face. Yet beneath that authority was hesitation, the flicker of a man who wanted order more than truth. "Mr. Reed," he said at last, his tone firm but carefully modulated, "we have a flight to operate. Everyone here is eager to get to Los Angeles. I need your cooperation to avoid further delay. There's another first-class seat available. Let's keep this simple." Malcolm Reed sat still, his gaze unbroken. His ticket rested openly on his lap, a quiet testament to his right. The hum of the engines beneath the floor vibrated faintly through his shoes. His voice, when it came, was calm but carried an unmistakable edge. "Captain, I am cooperating. I boarded as instructed. I sat in the seat my ticket assigns, and I have caused no disruption. Asking me to move is not cooperation. It is concession." Claire Whitmore shifted beside him, emboldened by the captain's words. "See, he doesn't understand. Just tell him to move. Captain, I've been flying with Skyreach for years. This seat has always been mine." Foster shot her a look of restrained annoyance, but did not correct her. His attention remained fixed on Malcolm. "Sir, I'm trying to resolve this in the smoothest way possible. Sometimes that means compromise." Malcolm felt the words burrow into him, familiar and bitter. Compromise. That was the word that had followed him his whole life. Compromise your tone. Compromise your presence. Compromise your dignity for the sake of peace. Compromise had always been the polite mask for surrender. His heart thudded steadily, but his face betrayed no turmoil. Captain, compromise cannot mean erasing one passenger's rights to preserve another's comfort. I am not moving. A murmur rippled through the cabin again. Phones shifted in hands. Naomi Park's livestream audience swelled by the second. Her camera trained steadily on the confrontation. Comments scrolled past in a blur. He's right. Don't move. This is blatant. Unbelievable. Claire rolled her eyes dramatically, her voice cutting across the quiet. This is exactly the problem with people like him. Always making trouble. Never thinking about anyone else. The words stung not because they were new, but because they were so achingly familiar. Malcolm felt a pulse of anger flash beneath his calm exterior. Inside, his mind raced. If I rise too hard, they'll call me aggressive. If I yield, I betray everything I've ever taught Maya. Which path leaves my dignity intact? Which path speaks the truth? He drew a breath, steady and deliberate. Captain, I ask you to consider this. Why is the solution to remove me, and not to correct the error that seated her here? Why does the burden fall on me? Foster shifted, clearly uncomfortable. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, his authority warring with the knowledge that the question pierced deeper than he wanted to admit. The air in the cabin was thick now, every passenger suspended in the balance of the exchange. Rachel Alvarez scribbled notes quickly in her pad, her journalist's instinct recognizing history being written in real time. Her eyes flicked between the captain and Malcolm, her pen scratching faster as Claire muttered under her breath about entitled complainers. Olivia Chen reappeared at the captain's side, her face pale. We really do need to push back soon, she whispered. Ground control is waiting for confirmation. Foster nodded, then leaned closer to Malcolm, lowering his voice as though offering a secret path out. Look, Mr. Reed, I understand your point, but the easiest thing here is to just switch seats. You'll still be in first class. Nobody loses. Malcolm tilted his head, his eyes sharp. Nobody loses, except me. The captain hesitated, then straightened. His patience was thinning. Authority only worked when it was obeyed. And here was a passenger, calm and composed, refusing to yield. Foster glanced around at the cabin, aware of the recording phones, the restless passengers, the tide of attention he could no longer fully control. Inside, Malcolm's thoughts churned. If I give in, they'll leave satisfied, thinking their system worked. If I resist, I may be labeled difficult, disruptive, dangerous, but silence has always cost us more than sound. Today cannot be another compromise. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself in the rhythm of his breath. He pictured his father's hands, calloused from years of labor, pointing to the stars when Malcolm was a boy. One day, son, you'll be in rooms they told us we could never enter. Don't let them push you back outside. When he opened his eyes again, his resolve was carved in stone. Captain, I am not moving from this seat. I am where I belong. The silence that followed was thick, broken only by Claire's incredulous laugh. This is outrageous. Just get him out of here already. Some of us have important business to attend to. Malcolm turned his head slightly, his gaze locking on hers. His tone was soft, but every syllable struck like iron. And you assume I do not. Her mouth opened, then closed, momentarily robbed of words. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Naomi's livestream comments exploded. "Did you hear that he's incredible?" She got put in her place. The digital world outside the cabin was roaring, feeding the fire that had been lit within. Olivia shifted awkwardly, her professional mask faltering. She knew now that this confrontation was no longer just about a seat. It had become a reckoning, and she was standing in the middle of it. Captain Foster rubbed his temple, clearly torn. His instinct was still to push for the easy solution, to prioritize schedules and timetables over justice. Yet the longer he stood there, the more he realized the easy solution was dissolving under the weight of witness. Every phone pointed at him was a mirror reflecting his choices back to the world. Malcolm leaned back into his seat. His body relaxed, though his mind blazed. He had chosen his ground, and he would not yield. Whatever storm followed, he would endure it with the calm strength that had carried him through every battle before. Rachel Alvarez's pen slowed as she looked up, her eyes shining with the awareness that she was not just recording a moment, but the opening of a movement. The engines hummed louder as the crew prepared for instructions that had not yet come. The cabin was suspended in tension, the air heavy with the inevitability of what was to follow. Malcolm sat still, hands folded, his presence unshakable. For the first time, Claire shifted in her seat, her certainty cracking as the attention of the entire cabin no longer aligned with her. The pedestal she had assumed was hers by default was wobbling beneath her feet. Malcolm's heart beat steady, each thud echoing his choice. He would not be moved. The cabin air had grown heavier with each passing minute, as though the oxygen itself carried the weight of confrontation. Malcolm Reed remained seated in 2A, his posture calm, his ticket visible, his gaze steady. Captain Foster had retreated toward the galley to confer with Olivia Chen, his jaw tight, his voice low. Claire Whitmore shifted impatiently beside him, crossing and uncrossing her legs, radiating indignation. But the story was no longer confined to those four walls. Naomi Park's phone, lifted discreetly above her tray table in row 4, had opened a channel to thousands of strangers who were suddenly witnesses. Her livestream comments scrolled faster than her eyes could follow. Some voices were angry, some were incredulous, but most were unified in one clear sentiment: the man in 2A should not move. "Stay strong, brother." One wrote, "We see you. Proof of racism right here." Another chimed, "Can't believe this is still happening in 2025. "Don't let them erase you," said a third, the words punctuated by a flood of heart emojis. Naomi's heart pounded, her thumb gripping the phone tighter. She had never expected her casual decision to film the incident would snowball into something so massive. She glanced at Malcolm, studying his profile. He looked serene, but she imagined the storm raging beneath his calm exterior. She whispered softly to herself, "Please don't give in." A few rows ahead, Rachel Alvarez sat poised with her notebook balanced on her knees. She had witnessed countless confrontations in her years as a journalist, but something about this one felt different. It was not just the racial undertones, nor the arrogance of Claire's entitlement. It was Malcolm's stillness, the way he resisted not with loudness, but with an immovable dignity. She knew instinctively that dignity was harder to dismiss than outrage. Her pen scratched quickly, her reporter's instincts urging her to capture every detail: the phrases, the silences, the shift in power that was slowly taking root. Rachel looked around the cabin, noticing how passengers were no longer casual bystanders. A man in 3B had stopped pretending to read his newspaper, his eyes fixed on Malcolm. A young couple whispered furiously in 5A and 5B, shaking their heads at Claire's audacity. Even the flight attendants in the back, their voices hushed, were stealing glances forward, aware that history was unraveling just a few rows away. Malcolm felt their eyes, every one of them. He felt the weight of expectation pressing against his shoulders. But he did not falter. Inside, a quieter battle raged. He thought of his daughter Maya, who had asked him once why people like them always seemed to be asked to move, to prove, to explain. He thought of the countless moments in his life when he had chosen silence for survival. But if I am silent now, what lesson will I teach her? That dignity is negotiable, that peace requires surrender. Claire leaned closer, her voice dripping with condescension. You know, if you'd just done the decent thing and moved when you were asked, we wouldn't all be stuck here waiting. You're holding up an entire plane because of your stubbornness. How selfish is that? Her words struck, but Malcolm only turned his head, meeting her glare with a calm that unnerved her. What you call selfishness, I call dignity, and I will not trade it for your convenience. The passengers stirred again, a ripple of quiet murmurs breaking across the cabin. Someone clapped softly, quickly silenced by the tension, but the message had landed. In the galley, Captain Foster rubbed his temple, muttering to Olivia, "This is spiraling. We can't have a full-on mutiny before we even take off." Olivia shifted nervously, glancing toward Malcolm's seat. "Sir, maybe we should just verify his boarding pass again. Make sure everything is correct." "Already saw it," Foster replied, irritation lacing his words. "Everything checks out. But if I move her, she'll complain, and we'll be filing reports for hours. If I move him, at least we can get in the air. Simple math." Olivia's chest tightened. She knew the captain's words weren't just about math. They were about priorities. Comfort over justice. Convenience over fairness. She swallowed hard, her conscience pricking. "Back in her seat," Naomi whispered to her phone, her voice trembling but urgent. "They're still trying to pressure him. This is wrong. We can't let them push him out of his seat." The stream of comments surged. Some viewers tagged journalists. Others tagged Skyreach's official account, demanding accountability. Rachel, ever the observer, noticed the way Naomi's voice cracked with conviction. She recognized in that young woman's fear the same seed that had pushed her into journalism years ago, the need to bear witness, to make sure injustice never vanished into silence. She leaned forward slightly and whispered to Naomi as she passed on her way to the lavatory, "Keep recording. Don't stop." Naomi's eyes widened, startled but emboldened. She nodded quickly, clutching her phone tighter. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, steadying himself. He could feel the narrative shifting, not in the hands of the captain or Claire, but in the phones and pens of strangers. He realized then that this was no longer just his battle. It had become a stage, and the world was watching. For a fleeting second, fear gnawed at him. Fear that the exposure would bring chaos, that his private pain would be consumed as spectacle. Fear that even victory might brand him forever as the man in 2A rather than the builder, the leader, the father he truly was. Yet he knew that fear could not guide him. Dignity demanded courage, even when courage was uncomfortable. Claire, sensing the shift in energy, grew louder, her voice shrill. "Are we seriously going to let one man hold us all hostage? This is absurd. Captain, do something." Her outburst backfired. A woman in row 6 spoke up, her voice sharp. "He's not holding us hostage. He's sitting in the seat he paid for. You're the one in the wrong seat. Gas fluttered through the cabin, followed by murmurs of agreement. Claire flushed red, opening her mouth to retaliate, but the captain's voice rang out over the intercom before she could. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We are experiencing a brief delay as we resolve a seating issue. We appreciate your patience. The announcement was meant to soothe, but it only underscored the gravity of the situation. Every passenger knew exactly what seating issue meant, and many no longer bought the attempt at neutrality. Rachel scribbled furiously, her notes spilling over the page. She circled one phrase. He calls it dignity. She underlined it twice, knowing it would anchor the story she would one day publish. Malcolm breathed in deeply, his resolve tightening like steel. He thought of his company, of the thousands of employees who depended on his leadership, of the message his silence would send. He thought of Maya again, her wide eyes looking to him for proof that dignity was not just an idea, but a practice. His decision was final. He would not yield. The witnesses had chosen their sides, and the story had already leapt beyond the confines of Flight 462. The stage was set for escalation. Malcolm Reed sat anchored in 2A, the hum of the engines beneath his feet a steady reminder that time was running out. The cabin remained frozen in a fragile balance, passengers whispering, phones raised, the weight of expectation pressing against every surface. Captain Foster and Olivia had retreated once more to the galley, their voices hushed and tense. Claire Whitmore fidgeted beside him, her frustration boiling over into sharp sighs and exaggerated glances meant to draw sympathy. Malcolm's phone vibrated quietly in his jacket pocket. He pulled it out and saw the name Ethan Cole. His assistant rarely called mid-flight preparation, unless something was urgent. Malcolm answered in a low tone, his voice calm but firm. "Ethan." "Sir," Ethan replied, his voice clipped with urgency. "I'm watching the live stream. It's everywhere. You need to know this isn't staying on that plane. We're trending already. Hashtags, screenshots, clips it's exploding." Malcolm's stomach tightened, though his expression remained steady. He glanced at Naomi Park's phone a few rows back, angled discreetly toward him. How many are watching right now? Over 200,000 live. And climbing. Skyreach's social media team is scrambling, but they're already behind. Major outlets are resharing. Rachel Alvarez is on board. "Correct. She's here," Malcolm said, his eyes flicking toward the journalist, who was still writing furiously. "Then this is more than a viral video," Ethan continued. "It's documented. It will become the story. You need to decide now if you want me to initiate the override protocol." Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, the word hovering heavy in his mind. Override. A tool he had hoped to never use outside of critical emergencies. It would ground the aircraft, summon executives, and make public what he had tried so long to keep private: his ownership, his power, his reach. He inhaled slowly, letting his thoughts settle. He remembered Maya again, her quiet question months ago. Why do they always make us prove we belong? He felt the familiar sting of compromise pressing at the edges of his resolve. If he yielded, he would protect his privacy. But at what cost? If he resisted, the world would know who he truly was, but the confrontation would burn hotter, brighter, and irreversibly. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "Malcolm, what's your call?" Malcolm's reply was measured. "Hold for now, but be ready." "Understood," Ethan said, though Malcolm could hear the undercurrent of urgency. "One more thing. Skyreach executives are already pinging me privately. They know you're on that flight. They're worried." "Good," Malcolm said softly. "They should be." He ended the call and slid the phone back into his pocket. Claire leaned slightly toward him, her voice sharp and mocking. "Who are you calling? Your lawyer, or maybe customer service? You're wasting everyone's time." Malcolm turned his head just enough to meet her gaze. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "I was calling someone who understands that dignity is not negotiable." Claire blinked, thrown by the weight of his tone. She scoffed, but her confidence faltered for the first time. Across the aisle, Rachel Alvarez caught every word, her pen racing across the page. She sensed the shift, the way Malcolm's calm carried more force than any raised voice ever could. Naomi Park whispered into her phone, her voice trembling with awe. "He's not moving. He just said dignity isn't negotiable. Did you hear that this man is making history right now?" Her live stream comments poured in, flooding the screen. "Legend. Don't give in. We're with you." 2A. Captain Foster reemerged from the galley, his face taut with strain. He approached Malcolm with the authority of command, though cracks showed in the edges of his composure. "Sir, this has gone on long enough. For the safety and schedule of everyone on board, I need you to relocate, now." Malcolm looked up at him steadily, his voice unyielding. "Captain, safety is not threatened by my presence in the seat I paid for. What you are asking is not about safety. It is about convenience, and convenience cannot come at the expense of justice." The words landed like a stone dropped into still water. Passengers shifted, their murmurs swelling into a chorus of agreement. A man in row 3 spoke up loudly. "He's right. Leave him be. We all see what's happening." Another voice echoed from row 6. "He's got the ticket. Let her move." Claire flushed deep red, sputtering. "You don't understand. I always sit here. This seat has been mine every time I've flown this route." Rachel Alvarez interjected, her voice sharp but professional. "Seats are not inherited privileges, Miss Whitmore. They are purchased. He has the right to be there." The cabin buzzed louder. The balance of power was shifting. Foster felt it, the authority slipping from his hands, redistributed among the passengers and the unseen audience outside. He clenched his jaw. "Mr. Reed, final warning. If you do not move, I will have no choice but to involve ground security." The threat hung heavy. Malcolm's pulse quickened, but he forced his body into stillness. He thought again of compromise, of every time he had swallowed the indignity to keep the peace. Not today. "Then do what you must," he said, his voice calm as stone. "But I will not move." Phones rose higher. Naomi whispered urgently to her audience. "He said it. He won't move. He's standing his ground." Claire shrieked, her composure cracking. "This is outrageous. Remove him already. I will not sit anywhere else." But even as she spoke, her voice wavered. For the first time, she seemed to sense the tide turning against her. Malcolm's phone vibrated again. He pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and answered. Ethan's voice came through crisp and controlled. "Sir, it's escalating. Skyreach Command is monitoring. If you give the word, I'll trigger override. We'll ground the flight within 2 minutes." Malcolm's eyes scanned the cabin, the passengers, the cameras, the captain glaring down at him, Claire fuming at his side. His heart was steady now, his decision forming with clarity. The time for half measures was over. "Be ready, Ethan," Malcolm said quietly. "The moment I say, execute." He ended the call and placed the phone face down on his tray table. His hands folded calmly in his lap. He felt the storm gathering, but he welcomed it. because this was no longer just about Seat 2A. It was about every unspoken compromise, every silenced dignity, every moment someone had been told to move, to yield, to disappear, and Malcolm Reed was done disappearing. The witnesses had chosen. The audience outside was roaring. The decision that would shake Skyreach Airlines was now only a heartbeat away. The hum of the engines continued beneath the floor, a reminder that the plane was ready to go yet trapped in limbo. The passengers had grown restless, their conversations rising and falling like waves in a storm. Phones stayed raised, their tiny glowing screens capturing every flicker of tension. In the middle of it all, Malcolm Reed sat steady, as though anchored to the very frame of Seat 2A. Captain James Foster stood near him, arms folded, his jaw tight with irritation. Claire Whitmore still seethed beside Malcolm, her foot tapping rapidly against the floor, each sharp click of her heel echoing her impatience. Olivia Chen lingered at the aisle's edge, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale and conflicted. Malcolm's phone vibrated again. He picked it up, his calm face belying the decision forming inside him. Ethan Cole's voice reached through the speaker, crisp and measured. "Sir, we're ready. All systems are aligned. If you confirm, override will initiate immediately. Skyreach operations will receive the command within 30 seconds. It will cascade through every channel. The aircraft will be grounded." Malcolm's gaze swept the cabin. Naomi Park's phone was still up. Her audience now counted in the hundreds of thousands, the comments flooding the screen with words like justice, stand firm, and we see you. Rachel Alvarez's pen had slowed, her eyes fixed intently on him, as though she knew the next words he spoke would shape not just her story, but the entire narrative of the day. He felt the weight of compromise hovering again, pressing like an old shadow. He remembered boardrooms where he had been the only black man in the room, where his ideas had been overlooked until repeated by someone else. He remembered conferences where he had been mistaken for staff, asked to fetch water instead of present his vision. And he remembered Maya's quiet voice asking, "Why do they always push us to the side?" Daddy. This moment was bigger than him, bigger than Skyreach, bigger than Seat 2A. He lifted the phone back to his ear. His voice was steady, clear. "Ethan, execute the override." Ethan did not hesitate. "Understood. Executing now." Malcolm ended the call and placed the phone on his tray table. For a moment, nothing changed. Then a soft chime rang through the aircraft, a signal usually reserved for crew communications. Captain Foster frowned, his hand going to the intercom panel near his shoulder. A second later, Olivia's tablet pinged with a message so unexpected she gasped audibly. "Grounded. Flight 462 suspended. Await further instructions." Passengers looked around in confusion, sensing something had shifted. A murmur rippled through the cabin as people realized the plane was no longer preparing to push back. The jet bridge was being reattached. The aircraft was returning to the gate. Foster's brows furrowed as he read the notification. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath. He tapped his intercom. "Contacting ground operations. This is Captain Foster of Flight 462. We just received a grounded order. Can you confirm?" The reply came back after a tense pause. "Confirmed. Captain, Flight 462 is grounded by executive override. Hold position until further notice." Foster's face blanched. Executive override was rare, almost mythical. It bypassed his authority entirely, pulling control from the cockpit into the hands of the highest offices. He turned slowly toward Malcolm, realization dawning like a storm cloud across his expression. Malcolm met his gaze, calm as ever. He did not speak. He did not need to. Olivia's eyes darted between the captain and the passenger in two-way. The puzzle pieces were aligning in her mind. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. Claire finally broke the silence with a shrill laugh. "What on earth is going on? Why aren't we moving? This is ridiculous. Captain, fix this." But the captain was no longer looking at her. His eyes remained locked on Malcolm, the weight of authority shifting visibly in the air. Naomi whispered to her phone, her voice trembling with excitement. "Something just happened. The plane isn't moving anymore. They said override. Do you hear that this man has power? I don't think they understand yet." Her live stream comments exploded. Override. Did he ground the plane? Who is this guy? Rachel Alvarez wrote one word in her notebook and underlined it twice. Override. She felt the gravity of it in her bones. Something monumental had just occurred. Malcolm leaned back in his seat, his hands folded calmly in his lap. The decision was made. The point of no return crossed. He could feel Claire fuming beside him, could see Foster's authority collapsing in real time, could sense Olivia's conscience battling within her. He could feel the passengers shifting, their understanding expanding with every passing second. Claire sputtered again, louder this time. "This is absurd. You can't just stop a plane because one man refuses to move. That's not how this works." Malcolm turned his head slightly, his voice soft but carrying the weight of finality. "That is exactly how this works." Foster's jaw clenched. "Who are you?" he asked quietly, his voice almost a whisper. Malcolm did not answer. Not yet. The silence stretched, thick with anticipation. He let the question hang in the air, feeding the tension that now gripped every soul in the cabin. Naomi's phone caught it all, her viewers urging her to keep filming, their questions echoing the captain's. "Who is he? What's happening? Tell us his name." Rachel closed her notebook slowly, realizing the answer would come not in a whisper, but in a revelation that would shake the cabin to its core. The jet bridge locked against the aircraft with a heavy thud. The door reopened. Airline staff began to gather at the threshold, their faces tight with confusion. Everyone on board knew something extraordinary was unfolding. Malcolm breathed in deeply, steadying himself for the next step. He had played his move. Now the world waited for the reveal. The cabin was hushed, as if every passenger was holding their breath. The jet bridge had reattached. The door cracked open, and the ground crew lingered uncertainly at the threshold. It was the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind that told everyone on board that what they were experiencing was no longer ordinary. Captain Foster's face was pale. His authority, once unquestioned, now felt like a paper shield. He turned back to Malcolm Reed, his voice low but shaking with restrained frustration. "What did you do?" Malcolm looked at him steadily. His voice was quiet, but there was no hesitation. "I reminded this airline who it belongs to." The words were measured, unhurried, yet they rippled through the air with seismic force. Claire Whitmore gawked, her jaw slack. "What on earth does that mean, belongs to? You're just a passenger. Stop pretending you're something you're not." Malcolm did not look at her. His attention remained on the captain. "You received an override from Skyreach's executive channel. That command didn't come from the ground crew. It didn't come from your flight director. It came from me." Foster's eyes widened. "From you?" "Yes," Malcolm said. His tone was calm, almost clinical. "Because I am not simply a passenger. I am the majority shareholder and CEO of Skyreach Airlines." The words seemed to freeze the air. For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one breathed. Then gas rippled through the cabin like a sudden gust of wind. Naomi Park's phone caught every second, her live stream viewers erupting with a flood of comments. Wait, what, he owns the airline CEO in 2A? No wonder he wouldn't move. Rachel Alvarez's pen slipped from her hand, clattering softly against her notebook. She leaned forward, eyes blazing with recognition. This was the story. Not just a confrontation, not just an injustice, but a revelation that the man they had tried to push aside was the very leader of the company itself. Claire let out a shrill laugh, the sound brittle, almost desperate. You expect us to believe that you're the CEO. Please? You're making this up to save face. Malcolm turned his head slowly, meeting her glare with a calm that seemed unshakable. Check the filings. Check the board records. Or perhaps wait for the announcement you're about to hear. As if on cue. Olivia Chen's tablet buzzed again with a new message. Her eyes scanned the screen, her hands trembling. The words were simple, stark. Confirm identity of Mr. Malcolm Reed, CEO, shareholder 65%. Comply with directives immediately. She swallowed hard, her throat tight. For the first time since the confrontation began, she spoke with clarity. Captain, it's true. She turned the tablet so Foster could see, her voice barely above a whisper. It's him. Foster read the message, his face draining of color. He looked back at Malcolm as though seeing him for the first time. My God! He breathed. The murmurs swelled into voices, passengers speaking over one another in disbelief. He's the CEO. This whole time. And they tried to move him, Naomi whispered fiercely into her phone. You all heard it. He just revealed it. This man is Malcolm Reed, the CEO of Skyreach Airlines. They tried to push him out of his own seat. Her audience numbers skyrocketed, the comment section scrolling so fast it was unreadable. Rachel's pen flew again, capturing the moment with frantic urgency. She underlined one sentence 3 times. The CEO was told to move from his own seat. Claire was trembling now, her bravado unraveling. No, this isn't right. There's no way. Why would you even sit here like this? Why dress like she caught herself? But it was too late. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Malcolm's gaze softened, though his voice remained firm. Like what? Like someone you assumed did not belong. That is the point. Ms. Whitmore, I should not need a title or a suit to be treated with dignity. The passengers murmured louder, nodding, their sympathy crystallizing. Even those who had remained silent now understood the gravity of what had unfolded before their eyes. Foster ran a hand down his face, his shoulders sagging. Authority had not only shifted away from him, it had been pulled out entirely, replaced by the man he had ordered to compromise. Mr. Reed, he said, voice hoarse. I didn't know. That, Malcolm replied quietly, is exactly the problem. Olivia felt tears prick her eyes. She thought of the countless passengers she had ushered into their seats, the times she had made quick judgments without looking deeper. She thought of her own family, of how they would see this moment replayed on every screen by morning. Shame pressed against her chest, but so too did the faint stirrings of resolve. She knew this would be a turning point, not just for the airline, but for herself. Claire, cornered by truth, crossed her arms and glared at Malcolm. So what now? You punish me? You make a spectacle out of me because you're powerful enough to. Malcolm's expression remained steady, unreadable. I don't need to make a spectacle. You already did that yourself. Naomi's live stream caught every word. her audience now swelling into the millions as the feed was shared across platforms. Screens outside the aircraft glowed with the moment, the cabin of Flight 462 becoming a theater of reckoning. Rachel lowered her pen, no longer writing, simply absorbing. She had always believed stories had the power to expose truth, but rarely had she seen truth so thoroughly expose itself. Malcolm leaned back in his seat, his calm unbroken, his voice, though soft, carried to every corner of the cabin. This is not about one seat. This is not even about me. This is about what happens when we decide that one person's dignity can be erased for another's convenience. That is not who we are, and it will not be who this airline is under my leadership. The silence that followed was reverent, as though the cabin itself bowed beneath the weight of his words. Passengers stared, some with tears in their eyes, others with newfound respect. Claire turned away, her face pale, her confidence shattered. Foster lowered his head, the reality of his choices pressing down on him. Olivia stood straighter, the beginnings of courage flickering within her. Naomi clutched her phone, her voice breaking as she whispered, "He's changing everything right now." And Rachel Alvarez, her notebook open but momentarily forgotten, knew she would one day write that this was the moment when Flight 462 ceased to be just a plane. It became a stage upon which dignity stood its ground, and the world could not look away. The cabin door stood open now, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed faintly from the jet bridge. 2 airline supervisors stepped aboard, their expressions tight with uncertainty. They had been called by an order they had never seen before an executive override from the CEO himself. Passengers craned their necks, murmurs spreading like wildfire as the supervisors conferred quietly with Captain Foster and Olivia Chen. One of them, a tall man with a clipped voice, finally approached Malcolm Reed in 2A. His eyes flicked nervously between Malcolm and the glowing tablet in his hand. "Mr. Reed," he said cautiously, "we've received confirmation of your identity. On behalf of Skyreach, I want to apologize for what has occurred here." Claire Whitmore, still seated stiffly beside Malcolm, let out a sharp laugh, brittle and defensive. "Oh, this is ridiculous. He's making all of this up. There's no way." The supervisor cut her off, his voice firm. "Ma'am, we have verified it. This gentleman is Malcolm Reed, CEO and majority shareholder of Skyreach Airlines. He has authority that supersedes even the captain of this aircraft." Gas filled the cabin, followed by a wave of whispers. Phones angled higher. Naomi Park's livestream audience swelled past 1 million. The comment feed a storm of disbelief and awe. Rachel Alvarez lowered her pen and simply watched, knowing some truths were too big for ink alone in the moment. Captain Foster's shoulders sagged. He rubbed the back of his neck, his voice low. "Sir, I made a mistake. I was trying to keep order, to avoid delay. I didn't realize." Malcolm's gaze rested on him, calm but unwavering. "That is precisely the problem. Captain, you didn't realize. You didn't look. You didn't listen. And so you chose the path of least resistance, which meant asking the man you assumed would yield to surrender his dignity." Foster flinched, his authority unraveling further. Claire erupted again, her words sharp, desperate. "So what? He's powerful. He's rich. And suddenly, that makes him right. This is absurd. I was promised this seat." Malcolm turned his head slowly, his eyes steady on hers. "You were not promised anything, Ms. Whitmore. You assumed. And in that assumption, you revealed something larger than a simple mistake. You revealed what happens when entitlement disguises itself as expectation." Her face reddened, her bravado faltering under the weight of his words. The second supervisor, a woman with steady eyes, stepped forward. "Mr. Reed, what would you like done?" The question hung in the air like a thunderclap. Everyone knew this was no longer a matter of seat assignments. This was judgment. This was accountability. Malcolm leaned back slightly, folding his hands together. His voice remained quiet, yet it carried to every corner of the cabin. "First, Ms. Whitmore will be reassigned. She does not belong in this seat. She will sit where her ticket entitles her. Nothing more. Dignity is not a matter of preference. It is a matter of principle." Claire opened her mouth to argue, but the female supervisor silenced her with a look. "Yes, sir. That will be arranged immediately." Malcolm continued, his gaze shifting now to the captain and Olivia. "Second, there must be accountability for the choices made here today. Convenience was chosen over justice. Silence over courage. That is unacceptable. There will be reports filed, reviews conducted, and consequences enacted, not quietly, not hidden, but transparently, because secrecy is the enemy of reform." Olivia's chest tightened, shame rising like a tide. But alongside it came relief that someone was finally speaking truths she had long known but never dared to voice. Malcolm's eyes swept the cabin, meeting the gaze of passenger after passenger. And third, this cannot end when this plane touches down. It cannot be forgotten when the news cycle turns. Skyreach Airlines will change, because dignity is not for sale, and respect is not conditional. The policies will change, the training will change, and the culture will change. I will see to it myself. The passengers sat in stunned silence, the gravity of his words pulling them into stillness. Rachel Alvarez's hand trembled as she picked up her pen again, scribbling furiously to capture every word. She had witnessed speeches in boardrooms, in courtrooms, at rallies, but never had she heard a declaration delivered with such quiet conviction in the middle of a plane. Naomi Park's audience exploded online, the comments filling with messages of solidarity, hashtags blooming across social platforms in real time. This seeks dignity in 2A. Stand with Reed. Skyreach Truth. Claire's face had gone pale, her confidence disintegrating. She muttered under her breath, but no one leaned in to hear her. The tide had shifted completely, and she was left isolated, a monument to entitlement crumbling under scrutiny. Captain Foster lowered his head. "Mr. Reed, I accept responsibility. I failed you. I fail my passengers. Whatever consequences follow, I will face them." Malcolm regarded him quietly. For a moment, he saw not just the captain, but the countless others, like him, men and women, who had chosen ease over justice, who had told themselves that compromise was harmless. His heart ached, not with anger, but with the weight of how deep the pattern ran. "You will face them," Malcolm said softly, "but perhaps you will also learn from them. Growth is possible, but only if we choose it." The supervisors nodded, taking notes on their tablets. The female supervisor glanced back toward the open door where other staff waited nervously. She whispered something to her colleague, then looked back at Malcolm. "Mr. Reed, Operations Control is requesting direct contact. They're asking for your instructions." Malcolm exhaled slowly, his mind steady, his resolve firm. "Patch them through. If we are to change, it begins now." The cabin held its breath once more as Olivia hurried to connect the call. When the voice of Skyreach's chief operations officer crackled through the device, passengers leaned closer, straining to hear. "Mr. Reed," the voice said, respectful and taut with urgency. We're at your disposal. What are your orders? Malcolm's eyes drifted briefly closed, his thoughts circling back to Maya. He thought of her question again, thought of the generations who had asked the same in silence. His answer would not be for himself alone. He opened his eyes, his voice clear. The orders are simple. We will no longer sacrifice dignity for convenience. Not here, not anywhere. Build the system to make that true. The line went quiet, the weight of his command settling. Then the voice replied, "Understood. Sir, consider it done." The cabin erupted in a soft wave of whispers, awe shimmering in the air. Phones stayed trained on him. Pens scratched furiously. Hearts pounded with the realization that they were witnessing something far larger than a seating dispute. Malcolm Reed had set the terms. And Skyreach Airlines, from this moment on, would never be the same. The hum of the engines felt different now, as though the aircraft itself knew the balance of power had shifted. Passengers remained glued to their seats, every conversation hushed, every glance drawn toward the man in 2A who had rewritten the rules of what was possible in a single flight. Malcolm Reed sat steady, his hands resting calmly on his lap, but inside he felt the weight of history pressing against him. He had faced boardrooms where billions hung in the balance, yet this moment carried a gravity unlike any other. This was not about profit or loss. It was about dignity, about whether the invisible scars of assumption and bias could finally be seen. The supervisors conferred near the galley, whispering urgently into their devices. Updates poured in from headquarters. Already, social media was ablaze. Naomi Park's live stream had surpassed 5 million viewers. Commentators compared the unfolding drama to past corporate scandals. Only this time, the CEO himself was in the center of the storm, not hidden in a corner office. Rachel Alvarez could hardly keep up with her notes. She had attended summits, hearings, even protests where voices demanded change. But never had she seen change commanded with such quiet resolve in real time. She studied Malcolm, his posture, his expression, the measured rhythm of his words. She knew this story would not just be an article, it would be a landmark. Claire Whitmore shifted uncomfortably, her face a pale mask of disbelief. Her entitlement, once an armor, had become a prison. Every whisper in the cabin felt directed at her. Every phone angled in her direction felt like judgment etched into permanence. Her chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, her mind clawing for an escape, yet none came. Captain Foster remained at the cockpit door, hands clasped tight. His authority had been punctured, but in its absence, a strange clarity settled. He had spent years believing leadership meant avoiding conflict, smoothing edges, keeping flights on time. Tonight he understood the cost of that illusion. The intercom buzzed. A supervisor leaned toward Malcolm. "Sir, headquarters has prepared a live link. The board is gathered. Operations control is online, and the communications team is awaiting instruction. They request your presence virtually. Of course, before we depart." Malcolm nodded once. "Bring it here." Olivia Chen hurried to connect the feed, her hands trembling slightly as she positioned the device on the fold-out tray in front of Malcolm. The screen flickered to life, revealing a gallery of executives in sharp suits, their faces pale under the harsh boardroom lights. "Mr. Reed," the chair of the board began, her voice taut. "We've been briefed. The incident is already viral. Investors are calling. Regulators will soon follow. We need direction." Malcolm's gaze was unwavering. "You will have it. But understand this direction does not mean damage control. It means structural reform. If we treat this as a public relations inconvenience, we fail before we begin. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. One man cleared his throat. With respect, sir, sweeping reform cannot be dictated mid-flight. We have processes. Malcolm cut in, his voice calm yet firm. Are often excuses dressed as order. I am not asking. I am telling you. The world is watching us now. They will measure our response not in days, not in weeks, but in minutes. The room fell silent. Even through a screen, his authority was unshakable. Rachel's pen paused. She let the silence linger in her notes, understanding it was as important as the words themselves. Naomi's live stream caught the boardroom's strained faces, the disconnect between polished power and lived reality. Comments surged. Some called for resignations. Others demanded proof of reform. Many simply wrote one word, over and over again, respect. Claire muttered from beside him, barely audible. You can't change an entire airline from one seat. Malcolm turned, his eyes soft yet piercing. Watch me. The board chair leaned closer to the camera. What do you propose? Sir Malcolm's voice was steady, almost gentle. First, a zero-tolerance policy for verified discrimination. Enforced immediately, not in draft form, not in committee, but signed and implemented before this aircraft touches down. Second, an independent reporting system accessible to passengers and crew alike, bypassing the usual chains of silence. Third, training that is not a checkbox, but a lived practice, measured and enforced. And fourth, accountability that begins at the top. Bonuses, promotions, reputations. They will be tied not just to profit margins, but to the dignity with which we serve. The executives sat stunned. Some scribbled notes. Others swallowed hard, but none dared object. Sir, one finally said, do you understand the cost of what you're demanding? Malcolm's reply came without hesitation. Do you understand the cost of doing nothing? The board chair inhaled slowly, then nodded. It will be done. The screen dimmed, replaced by the cabin's reflection once more. The supervisors stepped back, the device tucked away. A hush lingered, as though the entire plane had exhaled at once. Malcolm leaned back, his gaze distant now. He thought of his father, of the lessons whispered across kitchen tables, of the times dignity had been eroded quietly, with no cameras, no audience, only silence. He thought of Maya, and the question she had asked that morning. How long must we endure? The answer, he realized, was no longer bound by endurance. It was bound by choice. Rachel's eyes glistened as she wrote, capturing the humanity beneath the authority. Naomi's audience flooded the feed with messages of hope, disbelief, rage, and gratitude. The world beyond the aircraft roared with life, but inside, there was a reverent stillness. Olivia approached cautiously. Mr. Reed, thank you. Her voice broke on the final word, the weight of shame and relief mingling. He looked at her, his expression softening. It is not me you must thank, Olivia. It is yourself, when you choose differently next time. Tears pricked her eyes, and she nodded, retreating quietly. Claire sat rigid, her arms crossed, her pride collapsing under the reality pressing in from all sides. For the first time, she saw not an enemy, not a rival, but a man who had held his ground without raising his voice. And in that realization, she felt a gnawing hollowness she could not name. Captain Foster finally stepped forward. His voice was steady now, stripped of defensiveness. Sir, may I speak to the passengers? Malcolm gave a small nod. Foster turned to the cabin, his hand tightening briefly on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to apologize to you, and especially to Mr. Reed. My decisions tonight were wrong. I chose the easy path instead of the right one. That ends here. I promise you, as your captain, that this airline will change. Beginning with me." A ripple of murmured approval moved through the cabin. Some passengers clapped softly. Others simply nodded. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly. Hearing the sincerity, perhaps growth truly was possible, even in those who had faltered. Outside the aircraft, the night at JFK buzzed with activity. Media crews were gathering. Executives were scrambling. Regulators were dialing phones. And inside, one man's quiet insistence on dignity had begun to reshape an empire. The ripple effect had started, and there was no stopping it now. The cabin seemed to float in silence, though the engines rumbled steadily beneath the fuselage. Every passenger knew they were witnessing the conclusion of something that would echo far beyond the thin walls of this plane. The air was heavy with anticipation, as if each breath carried the weight of what came next. Malcolm Reed sat with his hands folded calmly, though his heart beat with the gravity of the moment. He had carried boardrooms and outmaneuvered governments, but nothing compared to this, a battle for dignity, fought not with lawyers or contracts, but with presence, patience, and truth. The supervisors returned, their faces pale with urgency. "Mr. Reed," one said, lowering his voice, though every ear leaned forward. "The media are already outside the terminal. News outlets are waiting. This story is everywhere. You'll be met the moment you disembark." Malcolm nodded. "So be it." Claire Whitmore shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her voice brittle as she muttered, "You're enjoying this, aren't you? Making a spectacle? Turning everyone against me?" He turned toward her, his expression neither cruel nor dismissive, but steady. "I don't enjoy humiliation, Ms. Whitmore. Not yours, not anyone's. But I will not allow your entitlement to humiliate me, or anyone who looks like me, ever again. If you learn something tonight, perhaps that will be the only spectacle worth remembering." Her mouth opened, then closed, her words withering in her throat. The intercom chimed softly. Captain Foster's voice came through, steady though tinged with humility. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We have been cleared to taxi shortly. Before we do, I want to acknowledge what has happened here tonight. This airline has failed one of its own, and in doing so, failed you. I promise that the change you've heard tonight will not remain words. It will become action." A soft ripple of applause broke out, scattered but sincere. Rachel Alvarez scribbled the moment into her notebook, her eyes glistening. She had written about policy failures, discrimination statistics, the dry language of reports. But this was a human transformation unfolding in real time. She knew her article would not just be news, it would be testimony. Naomi Park's live stream continued to surge, her phone buzzing in her trembling hands. Viewers from around the globe poured in, some sharing their own stories of humiliation at airports, others typing furious demands for reform. One comment scrolled past so quickly, Naomi nearly missed it. "This is history in 2A. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, letting the vibration of the engine settle into his bones. He thought of his father's voice, the lessons about dignity whispered in kitchens where the world could not hear. He thought of Maya, her question hanging in the quiet of morning. How long must we endure tonight? He had found his answer, not one day longer. The wheels lifted off the ground, and the aircraft climbed into the night. Yet the real ascent was happening inside the hearts of those who had borne witness. Hours later, when the plane touched down in Los Angeles, the cabin erupted in a strange silence again. No one leapt to their feet. No one rushed for overhead bins. They all waited, sensing that disembarkation would not be routine. The door opened, and a blast of lights flooded the entryway. Cameras clicked furiously. Voices shouted questions. The supervisors tried to shield the path, but Malcolm raised his hand calmly. "Let them see," he said. He walked down the jet bridge with unhurried steps, each one deliberate, as though carrying not just himself, but generations behind him. Claire trailed behind, her head bowed, shielded from cameras by staff. Olivia and Captain Foster followed, their faces sober, carrying the weight of accountability. At the terminal, microphones thrust forward, reporters clamoring, "Mr. Reed, what happened on board? What do you plan to do about it? Is Skyreach in crisis?" Malcolm lifted a hand, and the crowd hushed almost involuntarily. His voice was calm, resonant, unshaken. Tonight was not about a seat. It was not about first class or upgrades or schedules. It was about dignity, about how quickly it can be denied, and how firmly it must be defended. Skyreach Airlines will change. Starting now, policies will change, systems will change, leadership will be held accountable. Because the truth is simple. We do not sell seats. We sell trust. And trust can only exist where dignity is honored. The terminal buzzed with silence, broken only by the feverish clicking of cameras. Rachel Alvarez lowered her pen, her heart pounding. She knew these words would be etched into history, replayed in documentaries, quoted in classrooms. She whispered to herself, "Dignity is not for sale." Naomi's livestream audience soared past 10 million comments flashing like fireworks across her screen. She barely breathed as she held the phone steady, capturing the moment the world would remember. Malcolm's eyes swept the crowd. To those watching, to those listening, know this tonight was one story. But it is not the only story. Every day, people are told quietly, without cameras, that they are less, that they do not belong, that they must yield their space, their dignity, their humanity. That ends now, not just for me, but for everyone who has been told to move aside. We will build an airline where dignity is the first seat offered, not the last. The applause began softly, then spread, growing until the terminal rang with it. Reporters clapped. Passengers clapped. Even some airline staff wiped tears as they joined. Claire slipped away quietly, her figure shrinking against the blaze of lights, her story already written in the contrast of arrogance and truth. Captain Foster stood rigid, but this time with resolve rather than pride. Olivia lowered her gaze, tears streaking silently down her cheeks. Malcolm turned once more to the microphones. This is not about punishing a woman or a captain or a crew. It is about building a system where such failures are impossible. Justice without change is hollow. We will not be hollow. With that, he stepped forward, walking into the throng not as a passenger who had defended a seat, but as a man who had turned a moment of indignity into a movement of reform. The world had watched. The world had heard. And now, the world would never be the same. As the lights dimmed and the passengers finally stepped off Flight 462, the echoes of Malcolm Reed's words lingered far beyond the cabin. This was never about luxury seating or airline hierarchy. It was about dignity, the unshakable truth that respect cannot be conditional. One man's calm defiance revealed how quickly assumptions can wound, and how courage, even in silence, can transform humiliation into justice. The cameras captured it, the passengers felt it, and the world witnessed it. Yet beneath the viral headlines lies the deeper challenge. How many moments like this pass unseen? With no cameras, no accountability, only the quiet ache of being told you do not belong. Malcolm's stand reminds us that every seat, every space, should carry the same promised respect without question, dignity without price. His story is not just his own. It is a call to action for all of us to see, to speak, and to change. If this story moved you, let it not end here. Carry its truth forward, reflect on its lessons, and stand with those who are silenced too often. And remember, like, share, and subscribe to our channel, so you'll be here for the next story that demands to be heard.